Between 1820 and 1840, roughly 3,000 men went into the Rocky Mountains to trap beaver. They could set broken bones with rawhide, navigate by starlight, and sleep in snowdrifts wrapped in buffalo robes. A third of them never came home. But the thing that killed the most mountain men wasn't grizzly bears, rival trappers, or the cold. It was dinner. Every meal was a roll of the dice, and these are 10 survival foods that killed more mountain men than starvation ever did. Number 10. Rabbit on repeat. If you've ever hunted rabbit, you know the meat is lean, almost no fat at all. And in the winter months across the northern Rockies, rabbits were often the only thing a trapper could catch when everything else had gone to ground. So they ate rabbit, morning, noon, and night, day after day, weeks at a time. The French-Canadian trappers had a name for what happened next. They called it mal de caribou. The rest of the frontier knew it as rabbit starvation. And what makes it so terrifying is that a man could eat until his stomach was full and still starve to death. Lean meat without fat forces the body into a metabolic crisis. The liver and kidneys struggle to process the excess protein. The body starts burning through its own stored vitamins and minerals just to digest the meat, then flushes all of it out. Diarrhea sets in within days. Then comes an insatiable, gnawing hunger that no amount of rabbit can satisfy. Weakness follows. Then, death. The Hudson Bay Company kept records of trappers who died this way, men who had food in their bellies every single day, but wasted away like they hadn't eaten in months. Vilhjalmur Stephenson, the famous Arctic explorer, documented it extensively and wrote that a man eating only lean meat would develop severe diarrhea within a week, and if no fat could be added, that diarrhea would become fatal. The mountain men who survived longest understood this instinctively. Beaver tail, which is basically a thick slab of pure fat, was one of the most prized foods on the frontier. It kept you alive. Black bear was preferred over deer for the same reason. A black bear carries far more body fat than a whitetail, and on the frontier, fat was the difference between living and dying. The men who didn't figure that out filled their stomachs every night and wondered why they kept getting weaker. Some of them ate right up until the moment their bodies gave out. But lean meat was only dangerous over time. The next meal on this list could cripple a man after a single sitting. Number 9. Undercooked bear over an open fire. Bear meat was a staple of mountain man life. Grizzly, black bear, it didn't matter. If you could kill one without getting mauled, you ate well for days. The fat alone was worth the fight. The problem was how they cooked it, or rather, how they didn't. Mountain men rarely had proper cookware. They roasted meat on sticks jammed into the dirt beside open flames, charring the outside while leaving the inside pink and half raw. With beef or venison, that's a gamble. With bear meat, it's a death sentence. Bear muscle tissue harbors trichinella parasites, microscopic roundworm larvae that curl up inside the muscle fibers and wait. When a man eats that meat undercooked, the larvae wake up in his stomach, burrow into the wall of his small intestine, and start reproducing. Within a week, the new larvae migrate through the bloodstream and embed themselves in the man's own muscle tissue, forming cysts. The symptoms start with gut pain and nausea, then progress to severe muscle inflammation, swelling around the eyes, fever, and weakness so profound a man can barely lift his rifle. Out on the frontier, with no doctors and no understanding of what was happening, trichinosis was a slow, agonizing way to go. And this wasn't ancient history. As recently as 2023, a gathering in North Carolina produced 10 cases of trichinosis from a single meal of undercooked bear. The parasite hasn't changed. The danger is exactly the same as it was 200 years ago. But at least with bear meat, cooking it thoroughly could save you. The next item on this list offered no such protection. Number 8. The liver that peeled your skin off. Mountain men ate everything: liver, kidneys, heart, tongue. When you killed an animal in the wilderness, nothing went to waste. John "Liver-Eating" Johnson earned his nickname for a reason. The problem is that certain predator livers, particularly bear and seal, concentrate vitamin A at levels that are genuinely toxic to humans. One serving of grizzly bear liver can contain enough vitamin A to trigger a condition called hypervitaminosis A, and the symptoms are horrific. It starts with nausea and a splitting headache, then dizziness, blurred vision, and bone pain. In severe cases, the excess vitamin A begins killing skin cells. The skin dries out, cracks, and starts peeling off in sheets. European Arctic explorers documented this in chilling detail as far back as 1597, when a crew stranded in the Arctic ate polar bear liver and became violently ill. Their skins sloughed off their bodies. Indigenous peoples across the Arctic and the northern Rockies knew about this danger for generations. Bear liver and seal liver were strictly avoided. They were taboo for a reason. The European trappers and explorers who encountered this knowledge dismissed it as superstition. They chopped the liver up, tossed it in the stew pot, and paid the price. A single polar bear liver contains enough concentrated vitamin A to kill 52 grown adults. Even a grizzly liver carries enough to make a healthy man desperately sick. The men who laughed off the warnings didn't laugh for long. However, toxic meat was at least something a trapper could learn to avoid. The next killer looked identical to the food that was keeping him alive. Number 7. The root that looked exactly like dinner. Every mountain man knew how to forage. Wild parsnips, yampa roots, and wild carrots grew along the streams and riverbanks where trappers spent most of their time. These starchy roots were some of the only plant food available, and they could mean the difference between surviving winter and not. But growing in the exact same wet meadows, along the exact same stream banks, at the edges of the exact same beaver ponds, was water hemlock. The leaves look similar, the roots look nearly identical, and it is, by every credible measure, the most violently toxic plant in North America. A piece of water hemlock root the size of a walnut can kill a full-grown man. The toxin, called cicutoxin, attacks the central nervous system and triggers uncontrollable seizures within minutes of ingestion. Death can follow within hours. There is no antidote that a mountain man would have had access to, and in most cases there wasn't even time to realize what had happened. Historical accounts describe men convulsing so violently that their companions couldn't hold them down, and because the symptoms hit so fast, there was no chance to induce vomiting or try any kind of frontier remedy. One wrong root pulled from the wrong stream bank, and a man was dead before sunset. The truly terrifying part is that even experienced foragers made this mistake. The roots smell like raw parsnip. They grow in the exact places you'd expect to find edible plants, and there is no amount of cooking that neutralizes the poison. Boiling it, roasting it, drying it, none of it matters. Once you've eaten water hemlock, the countdown has started. But the plants weren't the only danger hiding along those mountain streams. The water itself was a threat. Number 6. Beaver fever from the water supply. Mountain men lived alongside beavers. They trapped them, skinned them, ate them, and used their ponds as landmarks and travel routes. They also drank from the same streams and rivers where beavers lived, defecated, and died. Beaver feces carry Giardia parasites, microscopic organisms that contaminate waterways and survive in cold, clear mountain streams that look perfectly safe to drink. A trapper filling his canteen downstream from a beaver dam was almost certainly swallowing Giardia along with the water. The infection that follows, sometimes called beaver fever, causes explosive diarrhea, severe cramping, nausea, and dehydration. The symptoms can persist for weeks or even months without treatment. In a modern hospital, it's unpleasant. In the wilderness, 100 miles from the nearest trading post, severe dehydration from uncontrollable diarrhea was a death spiral. The cruel irony is almost poetic. The very animal these men spent their lives hunting was quietly poisoning their water supply. Every beaver dam they passed, every clear mountain stream they drank from, carried the risk of weeks of debilitating illness. So the wild food was dangerous and the wild water was dangerous. But surely the preserved provisions they packed in from the trading posts were safe. They weren't. Number 5. Salt pork from a swollen tin. Preserved meat was a lifeline on the frontier. Salt pork, corned beef, and smoked meats were carried in from trading posts and packed on mule trains into the mountains. These provisions were supposed to be the reliable food, the safe food, the backup plan when hunting failed. Except preservation in the early 1800s was an inexact science at best. Salt pork was packed in barrels with brine, and if the salt concentration wasn't right, or if the barrel leaked, or if the meat was exposed to warmth during the long mule train journey through the passes, bacteria moved in. Botulism toxin is one of the most potent poisons on Earth. It's colorless, odorless, and tasteless. A man could eat contaminated salt pork and notice nothing wrong with the flavor. Within 12 to 36 hours, the toxin begins paralyzing the nervous system. Vision blurs. Swallowing becomes difficult. The muscles that control breathing gradually shut down. In a modern emergency room, botulism is survivable with antitoxin and mechanical ventilation. On a frozen riverbank in the Rockies in 1832, it was a guaranteed death. If you're learning something you didn't expect from this video, hit subscribe. I cover forgotten history like this every week. Now, bad meat and bad water were threats a trapper might recognize. But the next killer hid inside the one food that seemed completely harmless. Number 4. Hardtack and the fungus inside. Hardtack was the bread of the frontier. Made from flour, water, and sometimes a little salt, it was baked until it was dry enough to last for months. Trappers carried it because it was light, durable, and could be softened in water or stew when nothing else was available. The hardtack looked fine. What was living inside it was the problem. Weevils bored into hardtack within weeks of baking. The larvae hatched inside the dense biscuit and fed on the flour, leaving behind waste and dead insects that a hungry man would eat without a second thought. Trappers called them worms and either picked them out or, more often, ate the hardtack in the dark so they didn't have to look. The weevils were unpleasant, but they weren't the real killer. Rye flour contaminated with ergot fungus produced alkaloids that caused a condition known as ergotism, sometimes called St. Anthony's fire. The symptoms were nightmarish: convulsions, hallucinations, a burning sensation in the limbs, and in severe cases, gangrene that turned fingers and toes black until they fell off. Ergot poisoning had devastated European populations for centuries, and contaminated grain made its way into frontier supply chains. A trapper buying flour at a rendezvous had no way to test for ergot contamination. He just ate what he had and hoped for the best. Mold on stored flour was equally dangerous. Mycotoxins produced by common storage molds could accumulate in the body over time, slowly damaging the liver, kidneys, and immune system. A man eating from the same sack of moldy flour for an entire winter was poisoning himself one biscuit at a time. But if contaminated flour was a slow killer, the next entry worked fast, sometimes within hours. Number 3. Raw boudins and trail organ meat. Mountain men had a saying: meat's meat, and they meant it. When a trapper killed a buffalo, elk, or deer, the first thing he often ate was the raw liver, still warm from the animal. It was considered a delicacy, a reward for the kill. Some men sliced it thin and ate it on the spot. Others dipped it in bile from the gallbladder for flavor. Then came the boudins, a frontier sausage made by stuffing lengths of intestine with the animal's own stomach contents, the partially digested grasses and plants from the gut. These sausages were sometimes roasted over a fire, but just as often eaten, barely warmed or even raw. The practice might have provided some protection against scurvy, since the undigested plant matter contained traces of vitamin C. But it also delivered a concentrated dose of bacteria straight into the trapper's system. E. coli, Salmonella, Campylobacter, and a dozen other bacterial pathogens thrive in raw organ meat and intestinal contents. A man eating warm raw liver from a freshly killed elk was gambling with every bite. Sometimes the gamble paid off. Other times it triggered violent food poisoning that left a man incapacitated for days, lying in his own filth miles from help. And unlike trichinosis, which takes days to develop, bacterial food poisoning from raw organs could hit within hours. Vomiting, bloody diarrhea, and fever in the middle of the wilderness, with nothing but a campfire and a canteen. Many of these men never recovered, but everything so far, the parasites, the toxins, the bacteria, those were dangers hiding in the food. The next two entries were something different. The land itself was trying to kill them. Number 2, alkali water from poison springs. The Great Basin and the high desert of the American West are dotted with springs and seeps that look like salvation to a thirsty man. Clear water bubbling up from the cracked desert ground after days of travel through dry country. It must have seemed like a gift. Some of those springs contained naturally occurring arsenic, selenium, and heavy metals dissolved from the surrounding rock. Others were so alkaline that the water could blister a man's throat on the way down. The mineral concentrations in certain Great Basin springs were high enough to sicken or kill livestock that drank from them, and the men who traveled through that country were just as vulnerable. Chronic exposure to arsenic in drinking water causes a slow cascade of damage: skin lesions, numbness in the hands and feet, liver damage, and eventually organ failure. A trapper who camped near an alkali spring for a season might not connect his worsening health to the water he'd been drinking every day. The symptoms came on gradually, easily mistaken for the general wear and tear of frontier life. Many of the mysterious deaths recorded in trapper journals and trading post ledgers, men who simply weakened and died over the course of weeks or months with no obvious injury or illness, may well have been cases of chronic mineral poisoning from contaminated water sources. The frontier had no water testing, no understanding of dissolved minerals. A spring that tasted slightly off was still better than dying of thirst, and so they drank. Some of those springs were quietly killing them the entire time. But even the men who found clean water, hunted carefully, and avoided every danger on this list so far, still couldn't escape the number one killer, because they carried it with them on every single expedition. Number 1. The slow poison in every cup of coffee. Nobody talks about this one, because there was nothing dramatic about it. No sudden collapse, no convulsions, no identifiable moment where things went wrong. Just a quiet accumulation of damage, one meal at a time, for months and years. Mountain men carried pewter cups, tin plates, and lead-soldered cookware on every expedition. Pewter in the 1800s contained significant amounts of lead. Tin cans and tin cups were sealed and soldered with lead alloys. Even the glazes on ceramic pottery traded at rendezvous posts contained lead oxide. Every time a trapper boiled coffee in a tin pot, heated stew in a lead-soldered vessel, or drank whiskey from a pewter cup, He was ingesting small amounts of lead. Acidic foods like coffee and stewed meat accelerated the leaching process. The hotter the food, the more lead dissolved into it. Lead doesn't leave the body easily. It accumulates in the bones, the blood, and the brain. Over months and years of daily exposure, the effects build. Chronic lead poisoning causes abdominal pain, constipation, fatigue, irritability, memory loss, and changes in behavior that frontier contemporaries would have described as a man going peculiar or losing his mind. At higher levels, lead poisoning causes kidney failure, severe anemia, seizures, and death. And because the symptoms develop so gradually, a trapper experiencing lead poisoning would have blamed his declining health on the hard life, on bad water, on old age catching up to him. He never would have suspected the tin cup he drank from every morning. This was the most democratic killer on the frontier. It didn't matter how tough you were, how skilled a hunter, how experienced in the mountains. If you ate from lead cookware and drank from pewter cups for 5 or 10 years, the poison was building in your body the entire time. The mountain men are remembered as the toughest men who ever walked the American wilderness. And they earned that reputation. They survived grizzly attacks, punishing winters, and a kind of isolation that would break most modern people within a week. They paddled frozen rivers, crossed mountain passes in waist-deep snow, and fought for their lives on a regular Tuesday. They are legends for good reason, but their food was killing them in ways they never understood, parasites hiding in the meat they hunted, toxins concentrated in the organs they prized, poison growing in the roots they foraged, dissolved in the water they drank, and leaching from the cookware they carried on their backs. Every meal was a roll of the dice, and eventually the odds caught up with every one of them. The wilderness didn't just test these men, it fed them the very things that took them down. If this changed how you think about frontier survival, check out the video on what the Rockies did to the men who tried to tame them.